Good afternoon, Los Alamitos community. Ms. Tina, I'm calling the meeting to order. I want to take a roll call.
Mr. Fayette. Here. Ms. Catulli.
Here.
Mr. Forhan.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson.
Here.
Mrs. Hill is absent.
Okay, in Diana's absence, we need to appoint a clerk for this meeting only. And do I have a motion?
I'd like to move that Mrs. Catulli act as clerk.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, Meg's appointed for one meeting as my clerk.
We have to vote.
Oh, vote, yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0 support. Oh, now, Ms. Tina, you want, oh, we did the roll call, okay. Adoption of the agenda? Yeah?
I move we adopt the agenda.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0 vote. We'll move on now to our workshop. So Mrs. Reed, textbook adoption cycle.
Thank you very much, President Forhan. Today I'm excited to share with, for one day, you got it.
That's enough.
This afternoon I'm excited to review the State of California curriculum adoption cycle. And so just a little bit of background on the landscape of instructional materials and the why behind why we purchase curriculum and the timeframes that we do. Here in the state of California, our teachers teach content standards, and so those really are the learning goals for what students should know and be able to do at each level. But outside of the standards, there's also a curriculum content framework, and that framework really is the blueprint for implementing content standards. It elaborates on the standards, and it really describes the instruction and assessment methods that are necessary to teach the standards effectively. And so the content standards and the content framework is really what drives textbook and instructional materials. And so the State Board of Education supervises the adoption cycle along with the Instructional Quality Commission. And the IQC is really made up of administrators, both at the state level and volunteer administrators across the state of California who are nominated or apply, as well as a group of teachers and experts in curriculum from the university level who look at content standards and frameworks in a cycle. And so they look at those standards and frameworks in the area of world language, California arts education, mathematics, English language arts, history, social science, health, education, and science. And those content areas are revisited every 7 to 10 years. And so when we're visiting a content area, the State Board of Education is really working in the cycle. First, the IQC begins revising the standards. So really, what are students supposed to know and do at each grade level? So once we have a firm hold on the standards, then the SBC starts to work on framework revisions. So how will we address and get students to be assessed and ensure quality instruction across the state of California on those standards? And then the last part of the cycle is now we look at instructional materials that will meet the needs of the content framework and the standards that have been revisited. And so this process here, the revising of the standards, the framework revision, and the instructional materials adoption, that's a 5-year cycle in of itself. So every 7 to 10 years, one content is up, and when that content is up, it's a 5-year cycle from the time we start revisiting standards until the framework is revised, and then instructional materials are put out to market, where we see publishing companies and bringing new materials to market. Mrs. Catulli.
For a point of clarification, so it's 5 years for basically the textbook developers to come out with a textbook, and then we always review them and try them out. So that could be another 1 to 2 years.
It could, and we're going to get to that.
Okay.
You're doing great
Sorry.
forecasting for me this evening. And then I just do want to remind the board that the State Board of Education mandates K-8 adoptions. So every time the cycle comes through, we are mandated to engage in the process to determine if we need materials. But we do have discretion and authority at the 6-12 level. Really, that's a typo. That should really say at the 9-12 level, to whether or not we will adopt materials. And so it's not that they don't apply to us. It's just that we're able to look at the revision of the standards and the framework to determine if the materials and resources we currently have will continue to do the job, or if potentially just a supplemental material or a new textbook adoption is necessary. And so you may recall at the beginning of the school year, within the first 6 weeks, I typically bring forward a resolution to the board where we declare all of the materials that we have are currently aligned to the standards and framework. So although it's not mandated, we still are mandated in a different way to make sure that the resources and materials our teachers have access to are currently aligned to our state standards and framework. We just don't have to do it on this same cycle at the 6-12 level, or at the 9-12 level, excuse me. And then I wanted to remind the board as well that advanced placement classes and the curriculum updates are not attached to this cycle. So that's really a separate revision in curriculum that's really overseen by the College Board's framework for each course. And so we revisit materials as the College Board updates and changes its advanced placement summative examinations. So when the College Board makes changes to an advanced placement test, then we have to come back to our materials to make sure the materials that we have would adequately prepare a student for the new version of an AP test. So that's something separate that's always going on in the background that's not included in the State Board of Education's cycle of curriculum. And so what's on the horizon? So science actually crept up at a very interesting time in public education. And so Mrs. Catulli hit it on the head when she said, once the state adopts, that would be here in 2018, it typically is a year or two after that we're actually bringing materials to be used in our classroom. Well, that happened to be right about the time we went into the pandemic. And so many districts are a little bit behind in some of the NGSS alignments because of the timing of new materials in the market, and then us being in a pandemic or hybrid. So we did happen to complete our middle school implementation in 2020, prior to the pandemic. And we just finished the implementation at our high school last year when we finished our last set of books that we needed in the area of chemistry. We were still working on an English language arts adoption that also coincided during that time frame at the elementary level. So we've held on moving forward with the science adoption. And so we will be engaging this coming spring in a pilot and potential adoption of next generation science standard aligned curriculum for our kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms. And so that would also include a health education component. We have not been using our health education component since the passing of the California Healthy Youth Act, or CHIA, which we know changed health education K-12. We have adopted materials 6-12, and we did that in partnership with our science adoption. And so we will be looking not only at elementary science curriculum, but also at health education curriculum for our science classrooms at the elementary level. We will also be, fall of 2023, working with our arts educators at the K-8 level to look at our current spotlighting music adoption to see if it's still relevant and standards aligned, as we just ended the adoption cycle in 2021 for California arts education. So that will be on the horizon in fall 2023. Just a reminder to the board, and Mrs. Catulli also touched on this a little bit, when we meet and decide to adopt curriculum, it really just isn't a simple wave of the wand. There's a long process, and so I kind of wanted to review that. So first, we form a curriculum steering committee. So I'm going to use elementary science as the example, since we'll be engaging in that process this coming spring. We would ask for a teacher at every grade level, at every school, to participate, along with administrators, in a curriculum steering committee. And that body will be making informed decisions about moves that we make through this process. So they'll be sitting through multiple publisher presentations where they'll get a bird's eye view of what each of the offerings that are out at market to meet their needs look like. That group will then vote and have brainstorming discussions on which of those publisher presentations they liked best. We use a very formal process that's approved by the state of California, where we look at all of the required elements to a textbook adoption, and we choose anywhere from 2 to 3 typically pilots of materials that teachers will then bring into their classroom and use for an 8 to 10 week or 6 to 12 week period, depending upon the materials that we're looking. And so that will be occurring this spring with elementary science. Once our pilots have concluded, we bring back that curriculum steering committee and we really start to debrief what teachers liked with the programs, what they didn't like, how they see it benefiting or supporting instruction inside their classroom. And then ultimately, the committee makes an adoption recommendation. I then bring that recommendation here to the Board of Education and I do a presentation. Those materials then sit on community preview for a minimum of 30 days. And that really is our community's opportunity to come and preview the materials and share any feedback they may have with the Board of Education as well. And then finally, those materials would come back onto a board agenda and the board would take action to potentially adopt those materials as either core or supplemental instructional materials inside our elementary classroom. And so as we look a little further on, you're going to see that the work that Ed Services will be doing in partnership with our teachers really is looking at almost a content area a school year as we start to scaffold out. And so you can see that math will conclude the adoption cycle in 2024. Physical education, although typically does not have materials that are adopted, will have a framework that's completed in 2025. And so typically in the area of physical education, we'll see some training and professional development that we would provide our PE teachers so that they're really aware of any shifts or changes within the standards or framework. English language arts will be back out in 2027. History, social science, 2028. Health education back on the docket, 2029. And then we're back at science in 2030. And so when we really look at the standards and curriculum adoption, you can see that it really is almost one per school year as we round out this school year with the spring of 2023. And I did want to remind the board that Governor Newsom signed Assembly Bill 101 last school year that makes a one-semester ethnic studies course a high school graduation requirement, beginning with the class of 2030. And so although we currently have a year-long board-approved ethnic studies course, we will need to develop and approve a one-semester course that would fit into a student's schedule for the class of 2030. We'd want to make sure that it's available, that we bring it to board by fall of 2025, because ultimately we'd like it to be on the registration card for 8th graders in spring 2026. So that class is really a one semester option throughout the 4-year journey the class of 2030 will have as a Griffin, so they can best place that where it makes most sense in their Griffin 4-year plan. Education services will also be working in tandem with our English department, our social science department. We haven't done this yet, but we'll begin as it gets closer, looping out to also educate and share what other districts have done or will continue to do to meet that one semester requirement as well. So we've seen some districts have a social studies or an English class that meets 2 high school graduation requirements. So an example of that, Women's Literature and Minority Studies is an English 3 credited class in a neighboring school district. So the student meets the requirement of the ethnic studies, but also is garnering English 3 credit. So I think we have a very unique population at Los Alamitos High School. Our students are involved in all of the 4 A's. And so with none of the A through G requirements changing with our UC and CSU systems, we're also going to need to be very specific and purposeful to make sure we have as many options as possible to our students to be able to meet that high school graduation requirement beginning with the class of 2030, but still have plenty of room in their schedule to tick all the boxes for what their dreams and paths are post Los Alamitos High School, whether that's community college, a 4-year college, military service, or a trade or technical career path. So that really is kind of a quick rundown of the landscape between now and 2030 when we look at instructional materials and adoptions.
Thank you, Andrea. That was amazing. And thank you for being so forward thinking in terms of not just in 2030 trying to stick a semester in and figure out how the kids were going to get it. That was really great thinking. So you've approved, or we've approved, the Healthy Youth Act. Does that fall in this anywhere with science and health? Because it says kindergarten through 6th, but will we be addressing that, or is that approved for the future?
So the California Healthy Youth Act was approved by the State Board of Education and also through an assembly bill. And so we have already implemented the mandated part, which is teaching a set of standards once in middle school and once in high school. And so we're currently doing that through a board-approved curriculum at each level. We have decided as a school district to break that up, half of the middle school component in 7th grade and half in 8th grade. And then we do a 3-week rotation inside our physical education classrooms at the high school. It does exist within the science classroom at the middle school level. And so we will be looking at the health education standards and framework and how we can meet those with our science adoption at the elementary level as well. So they'll really work in tandem.
Thank you. Thanks. Great thinking.
Any other questions? Good job.
Perfect, thank you.
Very clear. Thank you. All right, moving on to item B. Dr. Frazier.
All right, good evening, Mr. President Forhan and members of the board, Dr. Pulver, Executive Cabinet, and our cabinet that's in the audience tonight. It's my pleasure to present today an enrollment workshop. So I know we've been talking quite a bit about enrollment over the last several years and really looking at some different data and how we're funded. And so I think this is important information as we move forward in years out and looking at some comparisons in this presentation. Really looking at the overall public school enrollment, we know that California in general has been declining. Our first decline was about 2013-14, and when we look at the data now, it really shows that this year's data for California is the lowest it's been in 20 years. Comparatively, Orange County and our school district, Los Alamitos Unified School District, have been on the decline as well. So if you look at the data from 2018-19 all the way through 2021-22, you look at Orange County, the decline has been about 6.41%, while in Los Alamitos, we have declined 6.23%. So we're about on par with the county. And again, the state has been seeing this trend since about 2013-14 with the cost of living, especially in Orange County with cost of living, and then the pandemic. I think there was a kind of a perfect storm in terms of enrollment decline. Our next slide really outlines the last 19 years of enrollment history in the Los Alamitos Unified School District. So it'll probably take you a while to look through all of that. But a couple interesting points to look at. I think in 15-16 was really our highest year of enrollment in the district, and that was at 9,935 students. At that time, our schools were pretty packed. Our high school was up around 3,200, and so 3,300, and then all of elementary school classrooms were filled. And so I think at one point it was purposeful to look at ways that we could alleviate some of the stress of the enrollment on the district. And so you see pretty steady decline, which I think somewhat was purposeful. And then there was kind of a cliff there in 2020-21. And so again, I think a myriad of reasons, but the high cost of living in Orange County, especially in the Roscommore Los Alamitos community, coupled with the pandemic, really kind of is where you can kind of see that cliff. If you look at our 2021-22 data, it brings us back very similarly to 2005-2006. And so we're right around that number. We're hovering about 30, 40 students different between those 2 years. As you know, we hired a new demographer this year to help us with some budget projections. We have our own budget projections that we collaborate between business services and HR. And so this chart really illustrates the Decision Insight, excuse me, which is the same company as Power School, their projections in terms of our 2022-2023 enrollment. So you can see there that they have a total enrollment of 8,960, with including our SDC students. And then our adopted budget projections were 8898 with 146 projected SDC students. And the reason on the business side of things, we like to be a little bit more conservative. It's better to underestimate what we're going to have than overestimate. And so that's why we have the difference between the two. It's about a 62, not about a 62, I think it's 62 as I'm looking at it and doing math in my head, 62 student difference. The next couple slides will outline our elementary enrollment. So the first one is by grade. So you can see some of our grade levels have increased. The addition of, it should be UTK, sorry about the typo. In kindergarten, addition of 43 extra students in the district. And then, like I said, some grade levels have increased, some grade levels have decreased. And so for overall difference in total K-5 enrollment, we're up 43 students from our CBEDs, which is our data that we get certified from October of the previous year. So October of the previous year, 2021-22, to Friday, this last Friday, September 2nd, is a difference of a positive 43 students. The next slide is the same. It's just outlined by school. So you can see some of our schools, a few of our schools have increased in enrollment, and a few of our schools have decreased in enrollment of about 20. You'll see in the next couple of slides is where the significant difference is in terms of our decline in enrollment. And as you can imagine, if our numbers are lower in certain grades in elementary school, those are going to trickle up to our secondary schools. And so that's where we're at this time. In terms of our 6 through 8 middle school, we're down 122 students from CBEDs of 21-22 to last Friday, September 2nd of 2009. The bottom chart just illustrates the 2 middle schools and the enrollment at the 2 middle schools. And we do really try to balance the schools out as much as we can and between the enrollments. And as you can see there, we're pretty close. So down 62 at Oak and 60 at McCullough, but overall enrollment is pretty darn close. And again, as the students trickle up to our high school, if we have got low enrollment as they're coming up through our elementary schools, our numbers have come down a bit at the high school. And part of that, again, was purposeful in a way because we were, I think, bursting at the seams, I think. So if you look at our CBEDS data from 21-22 of 3172 in our enrollment as of last Friday, 3,064, we would be down 108 students. Which brings me to our district-wide enrollment summary. So total district-wide enrollment summary, we've gone from 9106 to 8919, which is a difference of 187 students total. Now, I think it's important to point out that when we did our projections, again, we projected, we have 21 more students than we projected for our adopted budget. So that's always good that we were conservative in our numbers, and I would say, in terms of having that many students, that's a pretty good guesstimate on where we were at. We were kind of in between power schools and our district projections. And lastly, We're going to have our CBEDS date is October 5th for this year. So just as a reminder, the enrollment does fluctuate between now and then it takes some time to certify that data. They use different kinds of demographic information, ethnicity, special ed, some subgroup information. So it takes a little longer to certify. And what we've normally seen is that it has increased a little bit over the years come certification of the CBEDS data. So at that time, I'll turn us over to some questions.
I just want to make a comment because I was on the board when we had a higher student population, and it was discussed, and it was a decision to stop accepting interdistrict transfers, but by the same token, we weren't going to turn away any child who had already started in our school system, or if there was a sibling involved. And so it was very purposeful for us to lower, particularly our elementary schools, which would then trickle all the way up through the high school. Then, many other things happen, but I do want to say that your comment was correct, that it was actually a very purposeful decision made knowing that we were going to be lowering the amount of money we get, because in California, you are paid for that attendance. And so if you have fewer students attending, you're going to get a smaller amount of money. But we thought it would be better for the school sites and for all of our students.
So I'm looking at this chart, and it looks like in 2011-12, we were at about 9,700, and for 21-22, we were about at 9,100. So that's a 10-year loss of 600 students. So is that correct? Because I'm hearing from the community it's in the thousands.
According to our data, it would not be in the thousands.
Yes, this 600 over a 10-year period.
Correct.
And some of it was purposeful. Seems very reasonable.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also just have a little observation that the CBED isn't that number's in a couple of weeks out or a month out in October, just because, not impinging on anyone's, but I know on a Friday before a long weekend, my attendance was not always great when I was in school. So I'm just wondering if that kind of plays a part in those numbers being a little bit lower, or you don't think that.
This is enrollment, not attendance. We're funded on attendance, so it could ultimately affect our attendance. But this is our enrollment.
Is CBEST enrollment or attendance?
It is. There's very little funding that is enrollment funded based, but it is the official figure they use to adjust. So CBEST is enrollment.
Enrollment. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So it does fluctuate sometimes. We do have a military community as well, and so we do have residents that move in after school starts, and so that's where we see the fluctuation most of the time.
Any other questions?
The only thing I would add is, as Meg was sharing, is that there was clear direction from the board back in 15-16 that we were getting too large. We were starting to hear from our residents as well, particularly the residents within the Rossmore communities, where that community wasn't designed as well for traffic and things of that sort. That's also when the board took initiative to actually lose money on transportation and to reduce the cost of transportation to our students to about $1 a ride, to try to get more cars off the streets to also improve traffic. And so that was 6 years or more that we've had of declining enrollment. We were trying to kind of right size what we thought was our district. We thought we were kind of getting close to that right before the pandemic in the 20 school year, and then of course that pandemic hit. But what we're also starting to see is where we did that decline intentionally was to limit the number of new interdistricts we were taking at the elementary level. We weren't necessarily trying to do it at the 6-12 because we knew it would roll up, and that's exactly what you're starting to see happen. So our graduating seniors are, as you heard back in May, I think when Decision Insight came and presented, is at a higher number than our incoming kindergartens or universal TK. We do think we could see some growth. We saw it this year with UTK, which is welcomed. And then I just want to give a shout out to our executive cabinet and business services. We use Decision Insight to help us with the enrollment projections. From a budgetary standpoint, it's always wiser to use a smaller number and then say, great, we got more kids than we accounted for, because we can adjust that with our staffing, but it's hard to adjust that throughout the year from a budget standpoint. So we did use our more conservative enrollment numbers than Decision Insights, and I'm glad. So that really helped us out. We're actually about 20, 25, 24, I can't remember the exact number currently, above from our enrollment projections. Back to Mrs. Davidson, 2,000, that would be down to like 7,000 students if we were really that short. So if you look, really our enrollment is back about where we were back in 05, 06, right around that same time. And as many of you know, the state of California does have these ebb and flows with enrollment. But certainly the pandemic has accelerated it. People have lower birth rates as well. And through the pandemic, people have moved out of either the area, the state, with more and more virtual work. Families can work anywhere, so that within they can move and still kind of keep their jobs. So we're certainly in alignment with the trend in the state of California as well. So.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That was excellent. And we'll now, Tina, do we have any public comments cards? We do not. Okay, we'll now close this workshop and go into closed session where we'll talk about district labor negotiations, public employee discipline, and student discipline. So, adjourned. See you back.